In the silence that draped the chest of the night, only one compass pointed the way. It had long become the lone keepsake in the hands of a solitary man, spinning with the wind. Towns crumbled, names faded, but that compass still pointed north. When darkness fell, even the stars turned their backs. But he kept walking. Because some men don't follow maps, they follow what lives inside their chest. And if you're someone who walks quietly too, if slow stories speak to your soul, then leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Because this isn't just a tale, it's what the land whispers, so it won't be forgotten. Welcome to the Lone Sheriff's Compass. The sky was still a shade of lead when dawn arrived. The pale sun hovered on the edge of the horizon, hesitant to touch the earth. Among the dusty valleys, a lone figure moved, an old man and his quiet gray horse. Sheriff Elias had returned to Kunde. Dustwell for the first time in many years. Time had weighed heavily on this town. Wooden buildings had rotted, signs had fallen, and weeds now claimed the once busy roads. The town no longer breathed, but the past lingered. Quietly watching from every corner, Elias's eyes moved in rhythm with the slow gait of his horse. At each turn, each rooftop, he seemed to glimpse a ghost. This was once the place he defended, the town he served, but now only silence remained. He stopped by the old church. With deliberate steps, he dismounted and walked toward the graveyard. Gate, the rusted iron creaked like a coffin lid. He wandered through the crooked stones, led not by sight, but by something deeper. One stone called to him, cracked, forgotten, marked by a withered cross and a dry bush. Beneath it, a tarnished badge. Years ago, Elias had left it here, his justice, his duty, his past. No one had asked why. No one dared. But every night, the same dream haunted him. A child lost in the dark. A compass, its glass broken, its needle spinning. Elias calls out, but the boy doesn't hear. Then the compass falls, shatters, and Elias wakes up. He knelt, picked up the badge, turned it slowly in his hand. The rust whispered of years long buried. He pressed it to his chest, then placed it gently back on the stone. Who was buried here? A friend? A foe? Or something Elias had long buried inside himself? As the sun slowly rose, he mounted again. He didn't seek shelter. He had grown used to sleeping in his saddle. Under stars, he closed his eyes, and once more, the child, the compass. The voice returned. Maybe Dustwell had forgiven him, but Elias's own heart had not. A compass in the dust, a heart without direction, and a badge spinning alone. The sheriff had returned not to a town, but to the shadows of his own past. If this quiet trail moved your heart, tap like, subscribe, and join us under the stars. Asterisk night had descended over Dustwell like a heavy black shroud. The moon cast its pale glow across cracked rooftops, and long shadows danced like the footsteps of memories coming back to life. The wind roamed the abandoned streets like a silent ghost, occasionally stirring a creaking hinge or whistling softly through the broken boards. Sheriff Elias leaned against the back wall of the saloon, his face half swallowed by shadow, his gaze fixed on the old brass compass in his hand. Though heavy enough to resist the breeze, the compass trembled. It seemed to carry not just metal, but the weight of years. Elias lifted his head toward the stars. They glimmered above like a scattered map of guidance. Yet the direction he had lost wasn't in the sky, it was somewhere inside him. Closing his eyes, the dream came again. The same one. A child walking alone through a misty forest. Elias follows, calling out, "Wait, stop," but the child never halts. A compass lies at the child's feet. Its glass is cracked. The needle spins wildly, forgetting the north. Then a whisper drifts in like smoke. "You forgot me." Elias jolts awake. For a moment, he doesn't know where he is. His chest rises and falls rapidly. Sweat lines his palms, and the ghost of that Whisper lingers on his lips. He reaches into his saddlebag and pulls out the compass again. Its glass is intact, yet the fragility remains in his chest, as if the true break lies within. His horse shifts nervously, stamping the ground, its ears twitching. Elias senses something too. A whisper, carried not by wind, but memory. Elias ... He squints into the dark. The streets remain empty, lifeless. But that voice didn't ride the air, it came from inside, from some echo of long-buried recollection. He mounts. Sleep is out of the question. Instead, he guides his horse into the darkness beyond town. Not toward a place, but toward something half-remembered. A feeling, a truth. He glances at the compass one last time. The needle pauses, if only for a second. North ... It points true, if briefly ... and Elias rides on. Not just toward a direction, but toward the voice that still calls through the night, perhaps this time. Not only to find a child, but to find the part of himself he left behind. The wind shifted from west to south as Sheriff Elias guided his horse, Shadow, down a long-forgotten trail. It was not marked on any map, nor did it lead to any place of comfort. It carved through the high plains and faded into the misty shoulders of distant hills. The land here remembered silence. The silence of things lost, of voices that once echoed through the canyons, now only heard in dreams. Shadow was no young steed. His mane had grayed, and his breath was slow and steady like a seasoned companion. Yet, there was something noble in the way he moved, as if he, too, understood the weight of each mile they passed together. Elias barely spoke. There were no words left that hadn't already been said to the wind. Each night, as they camped beneath the open sky, Elias would tear a small piece of paper from his journal. On it, he would write the same phrase, "I was here, still searching." He'd weigh the note down with a stone or wedge it into the bark of a tree, as if leaving whispers. For the world to find. Perhaps for the boy. Perhaps for himself. The desert nights were colder now, not from the season, but from time itself. Elias would sit near the fire, watching the embers float upward like the souls of old regrets. He no longer dreamed of wanted men or ambushes in the ravine. Those shadows had long since faded. Now in his sleep, he saw campfires surrounded by laughter, horses drinking from a quiet stream, a young girl handing him coffee with a shy smile, and the strong back of a loyal horse galloping under a blood-orange sky. Once, he dreamed of Shadow as a colt, wild, untamed, defiant. He remembered the first ride, the dust kicked up, the falls, the bruises. He remembered the stubborn trust that grew between them. Not every bond is forged in fire. Some are made in silence, through shared journeys and 1,000 unspoken moments. Before sleeping, Elias would look at the compass. It no longer spun. It had found a direction. But he wasn't sure if it pointed him home or further into the unknown. He only knew that it moved when his heart did. And so they rode, not towards something, but away from nothing. Following memory. As one might follow a star, they were alone, but never truly lost. Not as long as the notes remained. Not as long as Shadow still walked beside him. The morning sun barely touched the horizon as Sheriff Elias rode past a long-forgotten fence line, half buried in wild sage and sun-bleached grass. Ahead lay a crumbling farmhouse, its silhouette torn and tilting against the sky. What once held laughter and labor now housed silence and ghosts. This was the McCrae homestead, or what was left of it. Elias dismounted slowly, his boots crunching over broken glass and brittle wood. The barn leaned like a drunk against the dusk, and the wind moaned through the splintered boards. But Elias did not stop at the house or the barn. He walked toward the well. The stone well sat sunken in the earth, covered in ivy and rusted chains. It hadn't drawn water in years. But still, it whispered. He stood beside it and closed his eyes. The air was cool here, as if the ground itself remembered. And then, the sound came, not wind, not memory, but something in between. A low murmur rising from deep below, like breath caught between time and sorrow. Come back. You never finished. Elias' chest tightened. He had not heard that voice in decades. Soft, high, the voice of a boy. A whisper that once cried beside him in the dark. His mind pulled backward. He was 10, maybe 11. Running through these fields with his younger brother, Eli. They had been playing some game, something about bandits and heroes. But then Eli disappeared. One moment laughing, the next gone. Elias had screamed his name, had searched every corner of the old property. He remembered this. Well, he had leaned over its edge, calling, pleading, but there had been only silence. Elias knelt now, his aged hands gripping the stone lip. He lowered a pebble, waited, no splash, just stillness. He whispered, Eli. The wind held its breath. For a heartbeat, there was only emptiness. Then, again, that murmur. Finish what you started, ... find me ... Tears welled in Elias' eyes. His hands trembled. Was it guilt speaking, or memory? Or something more? He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note. One of the many he'd written on the trail. He pinned it to the well's wooden cover with a single rusted nail. It read, I remember. I'm still searching. I won't stop. The wind stirred again, gently this time, brushing his coat like a hand on a shoulder. As the sun rose higher, Elias turned back to his horse. Shadow waited silently, patient as always. The past doesn't sleep, he thought. It waits where we left it. And sometimes it whispers from the bottom of a well. The valley opened like a scar across the desert, windswept and dry, but not without memory. Dustwell's border had long since blurred into the wasteland, but Sheriff Elias remembered this place well. Windy Valley, they called it. The last place. He chased a man through dust and wind, and questions he still hadn't answered. As he rode into the valley, the wind picked up again, not violent, but insistent, as if trying to speak. The dust curled around the horse's hooves, catching in Elias's coat and beard. He tugged the reins gently, letting Shadow take his time across the slope. There, in the soft sand near a tumble of red stone, Elias saw them, hoofprints, old but not yet erased. The wind hadn't claimed them. It was as if the land had remembered. He dismounted slowly and knelt by the tracks. The shape, the distance between prints, he knew them. Years had passed, but he would never forget the gallop of that horse, or the man riding it. The outlaw's name was Jonas Creed, accused of killing a landowner, caught after a week-long pursuit. Elias had brought him in, but something had never sat right. The man didn't look guilty. He didn't act like a man running from justice. He acted like a man running towards something else. And then, one night, in the valley where no one watched, Jonas had escaped. Or maybe Elias had let him go. The sheriff stood, brushing the dust from his knees. The wind surged again. And in it, a whisper, justice. Or mercy. He turned toward the canyon wall, eyes narrowing. The whisper was not real. Or perhaps it was memory wearing the mask of the present. Elias sat by a boulder, pulling out his trail notebook. He wrote, "This is where I lost him." Or set him free, still not sure which. He tore the page and weighed it down with a flat stone beside the tracks. Another note for the desert to keep. Night crept slowly into the valley, painting the rocks in deep purples and shadows. Elias built no fire. He wanted the cold. Wanted to feel the weight of the question pressing on his chest. Was it justice that demanded the outlaw be taken back? Or mercy that said, let a man with secrets find his peace? Elias didn't sleep much. The wind howled across the valley like a song of old verdicts. And in his dreams, horses ran wild, their hooves never touching the ground. Among them, one rider turned to look back. Jonas Creed, no anger, just a nod. and then he vanished into the night. When Elias awoke, he said aloud what he hadn't dared to before. "I think I wanted him to run." And the wind answered with silence. The first drops fell just as Elias crested the hill. They were slow at first, fat and heavy, but with each step down the slope, the drizzle became a steady rhythm, tapping against his hat brim and shoulders. The desert didn't see much rain, but when it did, the earth remembered. Below, hidden between two leaning cottonwoods, was the grave, unmarked, just a slab of flat stone, sun-bleached and rough-edged, half sunk into the mud. Around it, wild grass bowed under the weight of the rain. Elias dismounted silently, leaving shadow beneath the trees, and walked toward the stone. He had carved that stone himself. Years ago. No name, no date, no epitaph. Just a grave. His deputy had died here. No one had asked questions. No one had written reports. It had been a time of chaos, bandits, betrayal, blood spilled without witness. And Elias, carrying the burden of command, had buried the man himself. No ceremony. No farewell. He knelt beside the grave now, and the rain welcomed him like an old song. His fingers traced the stone's rough surface. It was colder than the ground around it. The wind had picked up slightly, enough to sway the tree branches, to stir old thoughts. He remembered the deputy's voice, young, eager, loyal, and how that voice had turned to a final gasp beneath a bloody sky. The memory wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the rain. Elias pulled the compass from his coat. Its glass fogged under the drizzle. He placed it gently at the base of the stone, watching the needle tremble, whether from wind or memory, he couldn't say. "You deserved more," he whispered, "and I failed you." The words disappeared into the sound of rain on leaves. He took a deep breath and sat beside the grave. Time slowed there. No past. No present. Just the hush of water falling from a gray sky. For a moment, he thought he saw boots across from him. Faint, transparent, like a shadow inside the storm. A figure standing still, head bowed. Watching. Elias didn't flinch. He spoke again, voice low. "I made a vow that day, not just to remember you, but to keep walking until I understand why it happened." Thunder rolled far off. The figure was gone. Elias stayed until the clouds began to lift. The compass was still there, glinting faintly in the soft light. He stood, not lighter, not heavier, but changed. As he mounted his horse and turned back toward the trail, a single beam of light broke through the clouds. It touched the grave, and behind him, the rain washed away his tracks. The wind had begun to howl again, stirring the dust along the cracked path leading to the ruins of an old postal station. Time had gnawed at the wood, bleaching the structure into a gray skeleton of its former self. Roof half collapsed, window panes shattered, but the red iron mailbox still stood upright by the door, bent, rusted, and stubbornly intact. Elias dismounted. The rain from the previous night had left muddy pools across the path, but he navigated them with the ease of someone retracing a dream. Shadow huffed softly behind him. Something in the air was different here, thicker, like the place had held its breath for too long. He reached for the mailbox. The hinge groaned. Inside, among spider webs and broken twigs, something pale rested. A single envelope. Yellowed, the paper delicate as dried petals. His name was written across the front in soft flowing ink. Elias. His breath caught. It was unmistakable. The handwriting was hers. He held it in his hands like a ghost. The seal was cracked with time, but it had never been opened. Slowly, he peeled it back, careful not to tear the fragile paper. The letter inside trembled slightly in the wind. The ink had faded in places, but the words still whispered through time. "My love, if this letter has found you, then perhaps you are still searching. I don't know if you're alive or only haunted. But I write this not as a goodbye, but as a beginning. There's a place beyond the canyon where the river bends twice. I will wait there, not in fear, not in sorrow. Just waiting. You won't need a map. Your compass remembers, and your heart. Your heart still knows the way. Find me. E. He stood there motionless. It was signed with only her initial, but that was enough. The letter trembled in his hands. He closed his eyes, and her voice echoed not just in his ears, but deep in his chest. He had thought her long gone, taken by time or violence or both, and yet, she had written this once, believing he might return, believing something inside him still pointed true. Elias looked down at the compass hanging from his belt. The needle, which had wavered so often, now stood firm, steady, as if something had finally aligned. He took a step back, feeling the weight of years shift on his shoulders. Then another step, and another. The mailbox creaked shut. Elias mounted his horse. Shadow turned without being asked. And together, they rode toward the canyon. Toward the place where the river bends twice. Toward the past, or the future. Toward something he never thought he'd feel again. Hope. The canyon stretched out like a scar carved into the land, its silent cliffs whispering ancient truths to those who dared enter. Elias rode slowly between the towering rock walls, the echo of each hoofbeat swallowed by the stillness. There was no wind here, no bird song. Only silence thick and waiting. The path narrowed. Sunlight filtered down in golden shafts, painting shifting patterns across the dust. Shadow's ears twitched. Elias pulled the reins gently. He felt it too, something ahead. Not danger. Recognition. At the heart of the canyon, where the stone curved inward like a wound healing over time, a man stood. He wasn't armed. He didn't move. He wore a long dust-stained coat and a hat that shadowed his face. Yet Elias knew instantly. This man was familiar, too familiar. His stance, his silence, his stillness. He was looking at a version of himself, of who he used to be. Elias dismounted, leaving the reins loose. He stepped forward. Dust shifted beneath his boots. The two men locked eyes. No words were spoken. No guns were drawn. The canyon did not need violence today. It had seen enough. The man tilted his head slightly, as if to say, "Do you see now?" Elias stared back, heart steady, breathing shallow. The man looked weathered, but not broken, haunted, but still whole. He was what Elias had buried years ago. Duty without compassion, justice without mercy, pride without forgiveness. The silence stretched. It wasn't empty, it was full of everything they'd never said. Then the man gave a single nod, a gesture of acceptance, of release. Elias blinked, and the man was gone. Or perhaps he had never been there at all. He stood alone in the heart of the canyon. And yet, for the first time, he didn't feel alone. The canyon had listened. And in its silence, Elias had taken his first step toward forgiveness, not for others, but for himself. He turned to his horse and rode on, lighter somehow. The past did not disappear, but it no longer led. The sun was low when Elias reached the hilltop. There, cradled by overgrown grass and creeping shadows, stood the abandoned church of Dustwell. The steeple leaned slightly to one side, like a tired preacher too weary to stand straight. Its wooden doors were splintered, weather-beaten. And yet, from within, came a sound soft, irregular. The bell. It swung slowly in the wind, creaking against rusted iron. No hand pulled its rope. No congregation waited below. It was the wind alone that stirred the bell, now a ghostly echo of forgotten faith. Elias stepped through the threshold. The pews were broken, moss-covered. The pulpit stood empty. Light pierced through a cracked, stained glass window, casting fractured colors onto the dust-filled air. He took off his hat, out of respect for something that no longer lived. He had not stepped inside a church in decades, not since he sat on the last intact bench. The silence here was not empty, it was thick with absence. heavy with things left. Unsaid, Elias reached into his coat and pulled out the compass. Its needle trembled but didn't point north. Instead, it spun slowly, then stopped, pointing behind him, back, always back. He closed his eyes. For the first time he prayed, not to be forgiven, not to be saved. He prayed to find not a direction but a conscience. His whisper echoed off the empty walls. Let me see. Not where I must go, but who I've become. The wind outside moaned through the broken eaves, and the bell let out a hollow chime. Elias knelt, resting the compass on the altar. It didn't point forward. It didn't move at all. As if, just for this moment, it honored stillness. He opened his eyes. In the stained glass above, a broken angel watched him, a figure missing a face. And yet, Elias felt seen. He rose slowly, left the compass behind, and walked back into the dying light, unsure of where he would go next, but certain he could face it. The sky had turned the color of rust. What began as a whisper of wind had now grown teeth biting, swirling, unrelenting. Elias had seen sandstorms before, but this one rolled across the horizon like a living thing. A beast made of dust and rage, shadow, reared nervously beneath him, snorting, hooves stamping against the dry earth. Elias tugged the reins, trying to calm the horse, but the wind howled louder, stealing sound and sight alike. Within minutes, the world dissolved into a blur of gold and gray. Shapes vanished. The path disappeared. He pulled his coat up over his face, eyes squinting against the burning grains. Easy, girl, he whispered to Shadow. But even his voice was devoured by the storm. Then it happened. A sudden gust, stronger than the rest, hit them broadside. Shadow panicked. The horse turned violently, nearly throwing Elias from the saddle. In the struggle, something slipped from Elias's belt, the compass. It fell to the sand with a dull thud, instantly half buried. He jumped down, crawling and clawing at the ground. But everything looked the same, sand upon sand, endless and shifting. He shouted once, twice. Nothing but wind replied, on his knees. Blind in every direction, Elias stopped moving. Beneath the roar, he began to hear something else. A new sound, not wind, not hooves, a hum. Low and resonant, vibrating through the ground beneath him. He followed it. His hand brushed against something hard, not metal. Stone, a flat surface. He wiped it clean. There, in the storm's heart, hidden beneath centuries of dust, was a carved symbol, a circle, a line bisecting it. The same mark once etched onto the compass's back. It wasn't just a storm. It was a revelation. He pocketed the compass found at last, under a thin veil of sand, and stood slowly, bracing against the wind. Elias didn't know where the storm would carry him, but he knew he wasn't lost, not anymore. The midday sun hung heavy above the plains, baking the land in silence. Elias rode slowly through the open range, the wind unusually still, the air weighed with something unspoken. Ahead, a figure moved through the tall grass, a shepherd, young but hardened, guiding a small flock across the brittle earth. As Elias drew closer, his eyes narrowed. Around the shepherd's neck, swaying gently with each step, hung a familiar shape, a sheriff's badge, not a replica, not a child's toy, but old, worn, with a crack running through the center like a scar. It gleamed faintly in the light, dulled by time and burdened with memory. Elias dismounted. The shepherd turned. He was no more than 20, eyes sharp with the kind of knowledge people shouldn't have to learn so young. You looking at this? The boy asked, fingers brushing the badge. It was my brother's, or the one that killed him. Elias's breath caught. What happened? The boy didn't blink. He was shot, wrong place, wrong time. They said it was justified. A robbery gone bad, but I know different. The man who pulled the trigger wore this badge. He held it up like an accusation. They dropped it when they ran. My ma kept it. Said to remember what trust costs. Elias stepped forward. Slowly, his eyes fell to the crack running through the badge right down the middle of the five-pointed star. He recognized it. It had been issued during his term. The number etched on the back was one he remembered. He had vouched for the deputy who wore it. A man with a temper. A man Elias had warned once, then ignored the next time. He had told himself justice would sort it out, but it hadn't. He took off his hat. "I'm sorry," Elias said. It was all he had. The boy didn't reply. He turned back to the sheep, letting the badge fall against his chest. Elias stood in silence. The weight of years fell harder than sunlight. Some crimes aren't about what you do, but what you choose not to stop. And sometimes, a broken badge speaks louder than a gun. The night was heavy with silence, and the lake stretched wide and dark beneath a pale, unwavering moon. The stars above shimmered faintly, like distant embers fading in a hearth long forgotten. No wind stirred the trees. No owl called. Only the sound of Shadow's slow breathing broke the stillness as Elias dismounted near the water's edge. He didn't speak. He COULDN single quotes T. There, by the black glass of the lake, stood a man, still, waiting. The years had changed his face, but not his presence. Elias knew him instantly, not with fear, but with the weight of all that had been left unsaid. "You came," the man said, voice low as a whisper carried on memory. Elias nodded. "I didn't know if I should." The man looked at the water. "Neither did I, but you're here." For a long moment, neither moved. Then the man said, gently but without hesitation, "I forgave you, Elias, long ago, but you never did." The words hung between them like fog. Elias felt something inside crack, not break, not shatter, just ... yield, a quiet surrender to a truth he had carried alone for too long. "I thought if I walked far enough, if I stayed quiet long enough, it would all settle behind me," Elias said, eyes lowered. "But it never did." "Because you never stopped carrying it," the man replied. "You carried it in your silence, in your compass, in your sleepless nights." They turned to the lake. Its surface reflected only shadow. Elias stepped closer and saw not the man beside him, but himself, not as he looked now but as he truly was, tired, worn, honest. For the first time, Elias let his eyes brim. A tear slid down his cheek, fell into the water, and vanished without a ripple. The man stepped back, nodding once. Not in farewell, but in understanding. "I can't give you peace," he said, "but maybe you can find it now." He turned and disappeared into the shadows. Elias stood alone, his boots in the cool mud, the water before him still, and finally, he looked into it, not to see who he had been, but to begin seeing who he might still become. The road to the final town was the quietest Elias had ever traveled. No more rustling winds whispering secrets, no more trails lined with the shadows of memory. Just the rhythmic sound of Shadow's hooves on dry dirt and the occasional call of a distant hawk. The horizon remained still, as if the world was holding its breath. When Elias finally saw the outline of the town, it was just before dusk. Faded buildings leaned slightly, their edges softened by time. Lanterns flickered in the windows, casting sleepy halos of light. Children played near a well. Laughter drifted across the dust. He tied Shadow outside the general store and stepped into the main street, his boots pressing memories into the earth. No heads turned. No one called his name. It was as if he were a ghost passing through a world that had forgotten him. And maybe that was what he had always feared and wanted. At the town's small inn, the keeper greeted him with a polite nod. "Name, sir?" Elias hesitated. For the first time in years, the name didn't come easily. "Just Elias," he finally said. The man smiled. "Welcome, Elias." He took a room overlooking the western ridge. That night, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the compass he carried did not tremble in his palm. Its needle pointed firmly in one direction and stayed there. Elias lay on the bed with his hat resting over his chest, watching the ceiling turn golden from the firelight. No dreams of broken compasses, no ghostly voices, just a sense of quiet that filled every breath. The next morning, he walked the town slowly. No one stared. No one whispered. He helped a boy carry a sack of grain, held the reins of a startled horse for a passing girl. The sun warmed his shoulders. Later, under the shade of a pecan tree, Elias opened the compass one last time. The needle hadn't moved. It faced westward. The mountains. Not to chase something, but perhaps to settle. He smiled. Not everything needs a name, he thought. Not every story needs to be remembered to be true. And that night, Elias slept deeper than he ever had. The stars above didn't watch. They rested too. The morning arrived with a strange stillness. The birds, usually the first to stir, seemed to hold their song. The wind hesitated at the edge of the horizon, unsure of whether to move. Elias stirred from sleep beneath a canvas of fading stars and the soft hues of dawn. He reached instinctively to his side where shadow would be grazing, but his hand met only emptiness. He rose, heart heavy, eyes scanning the quiet terrain. The horse was gone. No prints in the dust, no soft breath. Number. Low whinny greeting the morning. Just silence. He searched the nearby hills, the riverbed, the hollow near the pecan trees, but found nothing. And then, as the sun climbed slowly above the plains, he saw it, a patch of disturbed earth, fresh, barely noticeable to an untrained eye. But Elias had known shadow longer than he'd known most people. The way the earth curved, the subtle indentation. In the grass it all spoke to him. And it said goodbye. He dropped to his knees beside the spot. His hands trembled as they pressed into the soil. The air smelled of sage and dust, but beneath it, he caught something else. The quiet end of a journey. Elias didn't cry. Not right away. He dug, carefully, lovingly. The shovel struck no stones. No resistance, just time and memory. When the pit was ready, he returned with Shadow's saddle. He laid it down gently. Upon it, he placed the compass, the one that had guided him, misled him, tested him. Its needle, once frantic and wild, was still, as if it, too, had found its destination. "My last friend," Elias whispered, his voice hoarse from emotion and wind. "Now you point the way." He covered the saddle and compass with soil, packing each layer with quiet reverence. Each movement of his hand was a word unspoken, a bond remembered. When the grave was done, he placed a stone upright at its head. It bore no name, only a carved circle with a single arrow within it. North. Always north. He stood there for a long time. The wind finally moved again, brushing against his coat, as if nudging him gently forward. Elias didn't move, not yet, because Shadow was more than a horse. He had been the silence in restless nights, the steady rhythm on dangerous trails, the last listener to confessions spoken only to stars. Now, the saddle was empty, but the compass pointed true, and Elias knew the next step would not be taken alone. Not truly. The dust would carry memory. The wind would hum his name. And every trail ahead would echo with the sound of hooves that once walked beside him. Before we begin this final step on Elias's quiet trail, take a breath, settle in, and if this journey has touched something in you, consider liking the video, subscribing for more quiet stories, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. You're not just a viewer, you're part of the trail now. The morning arrived without drama, no crashing thunder, no galloping horses. Just a pale sun lifting over the edge of Dustwell's horizon, and a soft, dry breeze moving through the brittle grass like fingers through hair. Elias rode slowly, his hat pulled low, eyes half shut against the light. He knew where he was going. This time, the compass didn't lead. It rested quiet, still, unnecessary. He passed the outskirts of the town one last time. The saloon, the broken church steeple, the rusted water tower, they all watched him go in silence. Even Shadow's absence, still raw in his chest, felt like part of the hush that surrounded him. The old graveyard sat at the edge of a hill, shaded by a stubborn patch of twisted juniper trees. Time had softened the outlines of the stones, but Elias remembered every name. Each grave held a memory, some warm, some haunting. His boots made no sound on the dust as he knelt, one by one, beside the markers. He placed a hand on the dry earth, above each one. No words. Just presence. And then, beneath the oldest tree, in the farthest corner, Elias paused. It was a quiet, uneven patch of land, unclaimed, untouched. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, smooth river stone. It bore no inscription, no initials. He placed it gently on the ground. Not for someone else, for himself. A way to say, I've walked the trail. I've met my ghosts. I'm ready. He sat beside it, crossed his legs like a boy, closed his eyes. No badge on his chest. No compass in his hand. And for the first time, no doubt in his heart. He didn't need the stars or the horizon to find his path. He was the path. The trail was now within. The breeze stirred once more. And the grass moved like it was exhaling with him. When his eyes opened again, there was no need to go. And yet, he rose. Because peace is not stillness, it's knowing you can move without running. And Elias, sheriff, drifter, father, friend, walked down the hill one last time, not to disappear, but to be remembered. If this ending brought you a kind of quiet you didn't know you needed, let us know with a comment below. Subscribe for more journeys like this, soft-spoken, slow-walked, and made to be felt long after the screen fades.